Welcome to Betrayal Trauma Recovery, BTR.org. I'm Anne. I'm sure you remember what it was like when you were searching for help, maybe for your husband, hoping to find the right program or therapist. That's why I started podcasting. I supported my husband through 7 years of pornography addiction recovery, and not one therapist during that time told me I was experiencing emotional and psychological abuse and sexual coercion. I didn't want any other woman on the planet to be in the dark. If you're like the majority of my listeners, you're experiencing the type of abuse that's invisible and difficult to wrap your head around. Your husband is using porn or having affairs or lying to you, and you're getting the same bad advice about how to improve communication or your relationship. If you need support from women who totally understand, check out our daily group session schedule at btr.org/group. We'd love to see you in a session today. One simple, anonymous way to help spread the word is to subscribe to the Betrayal Trauma Recovery podcast, and will help make this podcast more visible and will help save other women from getting the wrong kind of help, like a couple program that will make this type of abuse worse. For those of you who've subscribed to this podcast, thank you so much. Your support means so much to me. I'm so excited to have Coach Jo on today's episode. She's one of our amazing BTR coaches. All of the coaches here at BTR have been through this and are now able to live free through strategy and boundaries. I'm so passionate about only having women who have been through this on our team. Jo facilitates group sessions and also individual sessions here at BTR. She's incredible, and I'm so grateful to have her. Coach Jo was married to 2 different abusers, so let's start with the first one. Did you recognize that he was an abuser at first?
I didn't have a clear understanding of what abuse was before we were married. And then pretty quickly it became apparent that there was something wrong and that it wasn't safe. I didn't have the words for that initially, but it became clear very, very quickly. It started on the honeymoon. The second night of the honeymoon, he left me in the hotel room for a couple of hours. I had no idea where he had gone. This is pre-cell phone. And I was just distraught and wondering what the heck had happened and what I had gotten myself into.
So what happens after this?
There were explosions at the house, a lot of angry outbursts, a lot of name calling, a lot of breaking things. And I had no idea what to do. And then we went on a trip together and we got lost in the middle of the night. And we were circling around looking for our exit or the connecting road. This was before GPS. He was cussing and screaming and driving like a maniac. And every time we went over an overpass, he would threaten to drive off the overpass. And this went on for probably a good hour and a half. And by the time we reached our destination, I locked myself in the bathroom and couldn't move. And 20 years of varying degrees of that kind of behavior. We have 5 children together.
How did you describe his behavior when you didn't know it was abuse?
I told one relative, and she said, communicate better, try not to trigger him, walk on eggshells around him. Then I did bring it to clergy. And of course, my husband was in the room too. And the response that I got was, has he hit you? And the answer was no. And so he said, so what's the problem?
At BTR, we are interfaith, but also interparadigm. So we have women who work here from various different faiths, also agnostic. So wherever a client is where we meet them. But would you mind sharing what your specific faith is?
I am Catholic. This was the only priest that I have encountered personally that had that kind of an attitude.
So this particular priest says, what's the problem? Did you try to get help from anyone else during this time?
About year 6, we went to couples therapy. We did individual therapy.
So many women think that couple therapy was going to be the solution. So finally, if he agrees to it, they're really excited about it. And then surprised and so devastated to realize that it makes it worse.
Kept thinking he doesn't understand. Surely he doesn't understand. He just doesn't know a better way. I focused my energy on trying to fix him. So couples therapy was my idea.
Did you know about porn use with him or affairs or prostitutes or anything?
Later on, I really understood what BTR talks about, sexual coercion. The idea that you are not a whole being and a whole person, that you are there for somebody else's sexual gratification. You have a person receiving sexual gratification from the humiliation and degradation of another person. So even if you don't have proof positive that they're watching porn, it will be very apparent in the way that they treat you, the way they look at and speak to other women as well. Really what it came down to was he did not have respect for me, and he had no respect for women. He did sexual coercion. If I would not comply with his sexual wishes, he threatened to kill himself. And then I found out he had slept with women in our church congregation, in the neighborhood, at the school. It was precarious and degrading not to know. And I didn't understand that that was actually abuse. I didn't have words or definitions for it. And I did file for divorce ultimately. And then it was a long, hard road.
Yeah, like you were saying before we recorded, your parents,
they ended up siding with my first husband.
And so throughout the separation and divorce, you were estranged from your mom and dad. I'm so sorry. That's so hard.
If I had to, rating traumas, that's probably not a good idea, but I would say that the trauma from that probably hit 10 times worse.
I'm so sorry. That's so hard. So you mentioned to me before we started recording that the second marriage was completely different. Really quick, before you share, at the very beginning of my marriage, I made friends with someone who had been punched. Your husband didn't help around the house. I think he was gone a lot of the time. And I said to her, something is wrong. And she said to me, oh, your husband is amazing. He's so great. He comes to church. He's always helping people out. Like, no, he's not abusive. You don't have to worry. The comparison to her abuser, who was just so overtly abusive, and the type of abuse that I was experiencing, that was gaslighting, lying, manipulation, porn use, stuff like that, was so different that she couldn't recognize it, but I also couldn't, but I knew something was very wrong. I'm not sure if that's what's coming when it comes to your story, but let's start with your second marriage. So 3.5 years later, you meet your second husband. Can you talk about when you first met him?
I don't think I had my sea legs under me from the first marriage. I felt like I failed at the first marriage. And so there was an eagerness to get it right, to do it again, to do it better. I asked all the right questions. I looked for all the flags. But what I didn't understand is you don't ask the person your questions, you ask the question and you observe for the answer.
I did the same thing. So I asked all the right questions. And yes, I didn't give it enough time to observe. And what I was observing was very disturbing, but I would talk to him about it and he would give me the right answers, right? Is that what happened to you too?
Yes. It was like a test. He knew the right answers, the answers I wanted to hear. He hid who he was, what the agenda was. And I didn't find that out until after the honeymoon.
So you're experiencing sexual coercion again, just like you did in the first marriage. In the second marriage, he's also using pornography secretly and lying to you. But in the second one, you do find out that he's using porn.
Yeah, he had joined a men's program for addicts/abusers.
Porn addicts?
Mm-hmm.
Did he do this on his own, or were you kind of like, hey, you should try this?
I did all the research. I thought, I got to make this work. I have to make this work, and found everything. We had a couples therapist, not helpful, 0 out of 5 stars. It was during COVID. I kept thinking that maybe something would change if I just hung on tight. I say that my first husband was abused by fire. Second was abused by ice. So he would withdraw. He would ignore your presence. He would tell you what you were feeling, but all of it very calm, very metered, nothing to see here. He wanted me to function in certain roles as a companion for activities, to show up and be the couple. I was useful for that, but then when I wanted to take up space and be something other than the role, that wasn't okay. I was too much. It was obvious that it was a pain if I were me instead of the role.
Well, because this wasn't a relationship to him, it was a show or something.
It was functional. There was an image, and if I was upholding the image, then that was fine. But if I was asking for something more, if I was asking for something relational, if I wanted to be myself, there was no room for it. Early one morning, we were talking. It wasn't a conflict. He was talking about how I looked or how I presented, and then he said he wanted to pour acid on my face and then sloughed it off as a joke. And I was horrified. It was through a conversation with my friend that she said, listen, this is a big deal, and you can't ignore this. You really need to speak with these women over at BTR. They can help you. BTR was a game changer for me because it gave me language. Somebody in BTR group said wife appliance. I went, oh, that's it. That's what I am. I'm a wife appliance. That term really resonated with me. Joining BTR and getting coaching was what I needed. BTR said the porn user is responsible for their own actions, and not just the viewing of porn, but the way they treat their spouse and the other individuals in their life as a result of the porn use. And it is not my responsibility to make it comfortable for the abuser so that they can stop their behaviors. The responsibility lies solely with the abuser and not the victim.
So how was that different than the other program that you were in or the therapy you were going to?
Sex addiction therapy does not give you the same language. It doesn't give you the same solution. In sex addiction therapy, you're told to communicate better, to provide a safe environment. So you check in and you talk about your feelings and you talk about what's bothering you and you talk about what you need. In couples therapy, you're supposed to communicate better. When you're communicating with an abuser, anything you say is used against you. Any information that you give is used to maintain that power and control. So it's very, very high risk for the spouse.
The emotional abuser exploits your emotions and the things that you tell them for their own purposes. So it's never resolving something between you. He's just excited that you're giving him information that he can use to exploit you. So it's extremely dangerous to be vulnerable with an emotional abuser. And I can't figure out why therapists haven't figured this out yet. And I think it's probably because they don't have any other tools. They just think communication is always good. Also, they don't think of him as exploiting the emotion. So they think, well, obviously, when she tells him how hurt she is, that will make a difference. They don't realize that's not what has happened in the past, and it's certainly not what's going to happen in the future. Therapists haven't figured this out yet because abusers lie and say they care about the relationship. They lie and say they care about the family. They lie and say they care about us when they don't. They're not going to walk right into the therapist and say, I actually don't like my wife and I want to have sex with other people.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing because like, I can't picture that ever happening. But at
Exactly.
least the playing field would be level, right? So that you can make an informed decision. And I think, as painful as it would be, it would give you enough information to make a decision that was in your best interest.
But because it's exploitative, they have a reason to lie. If they weren't getting something from you, maybe meals, maybe childcare, sex, if they weren't getting something, then they probably wouldn't mind saying, hey, you know what? I'm done. I'm going to go have sex with other people. But they need to keep their exploitative privilege intact. And that is why they're not willing to be honest, because they're going to lose something if they're honest.
And I think that's a difficult thing to come to terms with, the reality of, hey, hold on a second. None of this was in my best interest. It was very difficult to see it as intentional. The main difference that I found, at least on a practical, boots on the ground level at BTR, you weren't required to become vulnerable to your spouse in order to solve the problem. And I think that is the beauty of BTR, is it provides a space where you're able to speak the truth of what's happening without any background noise, without anybody trying to circumvent what you see. You can duck out of the subterfuge, take a minute to breathe, and really assess what's going on.
Yeah, without any interference from anyone else. Yeah.
It's so helpful. I mean, if I could wave a magic wand, what I would try to give women in these situations is if I could turn the volume down on the abuser's voice. Just turn the volume down to where you could sit back and watch the actions. You could sit back and watch the attitudes, what's actually happening, not what's being said. And that would be a huge gift. And BTR does provide that place to pause and assess what's happening. Even though it's difficult information, it provides a place to process that's safe. And then you can listen to other women's stories as well and see that you're not the only one, and look at the common threads. And it becomes easier to identify when you see it.
You found BTR in your second marriage, which helped you see the emotional and psychological abuse and sexual coercion. How would it have been different had you found BTR in your first marriage?
I think it would have been a game changer. I did not understand the emotional abuse, the exits and things of that nature. So even engaging in an individual session or two and just throwing out some of these behaviors and saying, hey, hold on a second, is this okay? Is this all right? Without my spouse there. Because up until then, all of the appointments had occurred with him in the room.
That's so hard with your abuser in the room. It's so unethical, too. The therapist doing that had no idea what they were doing, and it's so scary.
Because you can't say anything. Like, how do you speak the truth when you know there's going to be consequences? So they never have an opportunity to hear the truth of what's happening.
Yeah, it's really scary, actually. None of the situation was your fault. People don't get abuse education. And even if you understand it, trying to figure out how to be safe is difficult. Can you also talk about maybe what would have been different had you known about BTR going into your second marriage?
It would have been a more expanded view of what abuse looks like. And then the converse, what character looks like, what integrity looks like. It's not what somebody says, it's what they do. It's where their eyes trail. It's all of the things character and integrity show up in every area of somebody's life. And just being able to bounce some of that off of somebody. I think BTR is the perfect place to be. Maybe not in group sessions, but in individual sessions if you're dating. It's a beautiful space to like talk about behaviors, talk about attitudes, talk about tone, talk about habits, things like that, to where you can sort these things out with somebody else who gets it. Take time to investigate and then make an informed decision, or as informed as you can. The gift of a pause and a little bit of silence makes all the difference in the world. One of the things that made BTR different was the focus on the things that I had control over, like setting boundaries, like what level of risk I wanted to take when I was talking with my husband, how to navigate day-to-day living and all of the details where the abuse permeates your life.
Did you find that any other resource that you went to ever really understood all the different ways that it permeates your life?
I think that the underlying understanding was that they believed the mask. Truly, he was a good guy who was just not slick enough to recognize the mistakes he was making. And BTR reframed it as, well, he's hitting the bullseye every time. How is that an accident? How does he happen to say the thing that hurts you the most right after you told him that that was painful? How does he happen to withhold when you're having the worst day ever and you've got tears running down your face? That's not an accident. But all the other programs looked at it like, oh, he's just goofy. He doesn't mean any of it. BTR looked at it and went, no, hold on a second. You can't hit the mark right on that many times accidentally. It doesn't work that way. And if you step back and look at it, it makes total sense, but you have to step back and look at it from a different angle. And it's not my job to figure out why, but BTR helped me to say, hey, what's happening? What does it feel like? What does it look like? And then what do you want to do? It gave me choices.
I think one of the things that other professionals are maybe afraid of is the consequences of calling it abuse. And BTR is not afraid. We're not pro-divorce. We're definitely pro-safety. And pro-safety means we're not afraid of looking it right in the eye and calling it what it is. Whereas I think other people are like, if I say that to him, it might hurt his feelings, or it might make him angry, or the marriage might fall apart, or, this or that. And BTR is not afraid of the consequences of truth.
And what it comes down to, the way I look at it, is who's paying the price tag for these behaviors. Everybody's okay with the wife paying the price tag for the behaviors, but nobody wants to put it on the perpetrator. And that is a huge shift too, which is, hold on a second, I pay the price tags for my actions and you need to pay them for yours.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that the typical professional in this doesn't mind having the woman pay the price tag, but they really have a hard time with the man paying it?
There's an image that's maintained of the man being just a hapless victim of his own actions, which is kind of insulting, quite frankly.
Insulting to him, you mean?
Absolutely. But I'm looking at somebody that makes the same choice 10, 12, 20, 100 times in a row. And it's a conscious decision. He actually has to make effort to make these choices. So he's got free will and he's exercising it. Why can't we look at that and say, all right, now what are we going to do? Oh, he's a big, goofy, nice guy who doesn't really understand what he's doing. Give him a break. Just be nicer. Just communicate better. He'll get it eventually. That's the prevailing paradigm.
Which only benefits him, does not benefit the victim at all. So after you had such success and healing through BTR, you decided that you wanted to be a BTR coach. Can you talk more about why you made that decision?
It's just such a beautiful community to be a part of. Seeing women grow, become strong, make decisions that will benefit them and their families moving forward. I absolutely loved, when I was in group, watching women dream again and dreaming again myself, seeing something different for my life that may or may not include marriage, that may or may not include dating. There was a sense of freedom. To be a part of that was just so special. And also helping women through the rough times, sitting with them to be a comfort and to give language where none existed before, and then maybe help them focus their hope towards a brighter future.
Mm-hmm.
And just seeing that happen was just so beautiful. The desire to be a part of that was overwhelming.
We're so grateful to have you. You're such an important part of our team. Coach Jo had an amazing career that she could have continued, and she decided to stop doing that and do this because she wanted her career and her work life to be more fulfilling to her. You have these amazing skills that you bring to the table when you coach at BTR.
Yeah, BTR fit with everything that I have loved in my professional career with finance. So the additional training that I've been able to take as a BTR coach for divorce, some in finance and with some of the legalities, was right in my wheelhouse. And then combining that with being able to walk with women as they go through these just courageous journeys in dealing with the abuse and then transforming through all of it. It's a fulfilling culmination of putting all the skills to good use to help women.
One of the things I think is so important with abuse coaching is having someone who has experience, personal experience. All of the coaches here at BTR have been through this. They've all experienced this type of abuse. And then they also have the training. So they know what it feels like to have their husband cheat on them. They know what it feels like to tell people and not get help. All of our coaches here really understand it on a visceral level, but then also educated. All of us at BTR have been through the harrowing adventure that is healing from betrayal trauma. Can you talk about helping women through that as a coach? Because I think that's another thing that perhaps influencers or therapists might give people the impression that, like, oh, as soon as you just like change this, things will go really fast for you. You'll be fine, kind of a thing. I'm just thinking of a few influencers that I know that have these like fix your marriage workshops. And they're like 6 classes. Each class is like a half hour and it's the static thing online. And you check off some boxes like, did you tell him how you feel? Great. Box checked. Did you do this? Check. As if there's some magic thing that can solve all these problems quickly. Or, oh, he stopped using porn. Yay, check. It's over with.
That's so scary.
It's scary. It's so scary. I'm like, this is a journey. And it's hard for me to say that because I want to give women hope that safety is possible, but also realistic expectations. A friend was over at my house the other night and she was feeling really terrible. She's about to file for divorce and she is just not feeling great. And I said to her, I promise you're going to feel better and then I paused and I said, are you ready for me to tell you how long? And I said, at least 3 years. It was like the most awful thing to say to someone, but it also kind of liberates you to know I'm not weird. I'm not crazy. There's nothing wrong with me, that it's taking a while for me to extricate myself from this nightmare, because it's a nightmare.
Yeah, absolutely. And the idea is not that you go through purgatory for 3 years and all of a sudden you've arrived. It is a process. It's like a snowball rolling downhill. Over time, incrementally, you're adding on to your confidence, your belief in yourself, your knowledge, your skills to be out in the world, and you're building a life, and that takes time. It's a beautiful, incremental, step by step process. And being a part of BTR while you're going through that process provides language, provides support in the form of community and other women who are going through it with you. And it also provides vision. You see, oh, they've been here for 2 years and they're finally wrapping up their divorce. And that healing that has taken place along the way, you're a witness, even if that's not where you're at on your path, it does show you that a different future is possible, but it's a baby step process. And it's beautiful as a coach to be able to help the client look in the rearview mirror and see how far they've come. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts of coaching. You're going through the hard stuff, but it's also being able to remind somebody, remember when we started out back here? And look how far you've come.
Everybody's path is different, and it doesn't have to include divorce, but regardless of what you choose and where your path leads you, BTR can help you on that path. If someone is listening and this is the first episode they've ever heard of the BTR podcast, and they're thinking, I'm not sure my husband is abusive. This sounds kind of extreme. I don't know. Maybe I should try couple therapy first. What would you say to them?
Check your gut, because there's a reason why you're listening. Do an inner inventory. Be really, really honest. It's scary at first. And then bring in points of view from women who have gone through it. Give BTR a shot. Nobody at BTR is going to push you anywhere that you don't want to go. No BTR coach is ever going to try and direct you somewhere. You're going to determine your path, your pace.
One of the things that I had a hard time with when I first started considering that it was emotional and psychological abuse and sexual coercion that I was dealing with was I didn't want that to be the case because I didn't want the consequences of it. Sometimes I think people wonder, if I get educated about abuse, am I just going to see it where it isn't? That saying, like, if you're a hammer, everything's a nail. Am I going to just say it's abuse when it's not that? All the women that I've talked to that listen to the podcast, if their husband is not abusive, they tell me things like, I didn't really relate to it. Abuse education is just abuse education. It doesn't create abuse when abuse doesn't exist. As we describe these things, if you relate, if you're like, that is exactly what's happening to me, then you can start making decisions in the light of truth. That's one thing we do really well here is give women very concrete ways to improve their safety, and then they can observe at a safe distance to see what the reality of their situation is where they really couldn't see it before.
The Living Free workshop is excellent at defining what boundaries are, what they look like, and a practical map for how to use them. One of the most important ideas that I did not grasp during the first marriage or the second marriage was that you can't be perfect enough to stop abuse. So spinning your wheels, trying to get everything right, keep all the plates spinning, do it with a smile on your face, don't react, don't be harsh, but communicate things that make him feel good about himself or whatever the paradigm is. You can't do it right enough to fix whatever's happening with him. You can't stop his abuse by being more perfect.
Or even by getting him in the right program. There's lots of things that would apply there.
Yeah. Say it right, do it right, find the right instructor, the right video.
Yeah, find the right video, find the right therapist, find the right this, find the right that. It's crazy, all the things.
I can have my cousin's husband talk to him. Maybe that'll fix it. And
exactly.
The proof is in the pudding. He's been doing this for years. And people know right and wrong. I think that's the hardest thing to come to grips with, is that this is a conscious decision. And watching what's happening and looking at that in reality and saying, hey, hold on a second, this is a conscious decision. And so in turn, I have to start making conscious decisions about my emotional safety, the safety of my family. What does safety look like in my context? The beauty of BTR is that we'll walk alongside as you figure it out. And sometimes the spouses do come alongside. So what you were saying before, it doesn't always end in divorce. A spouse can choose to come alongside and walk that new path.
Yeah, we have no idea what's going to happen. I wish we did. I wish there were some guarantees. That's what we all wanted when we started this journey. It was just something to let us know that we would be okay. And the good news is there's a way to be okay. There's a way to heal. There's a way to live a life of peace. There's a way to thrive. We don't know exactly how you're going to apply the principles of safety, but we do know what those principles of safety are. And that is why I think other programs are dangerous. They assume that if you just educate him a little bit better, that he'll be able to do the right thing, which doesn't make sense because he knows how to do the right thing. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to even act like he knew how to do the right thing if he didn't know what the right thing was. Coach Jo is available to do individual sessions with clients. She also runs several of our group sessions. Attending BTR group sessions is a great way to get to know all the coaches and see which one you jive with, and then do an individual session from there. Our coaches are all incredible. They're all so knowledgeable. And the most important thing, they've all been through it. So they all totally understand what you're going through. You're amazing, Coach Jo. I love having you on the BTR team. And I'm so glad that we got to talk today on the podcast so the listeners get to know you better. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, Anne. I appreciate being on the team with you. It's such a joy.
If this podcast is helpful to you, please help us reach other women by following or subscribing and giving us a 5-star rating. Thank you for helping other women find us. If you've already purchased a copy of my book, Trauma Mama, Husband Drama, please circle back and give it a 5-star rating. A lot of women are searching for books about betrayal trauma on Amazon, and rating Trauma Mama will help them find this podcast, which is free to everyone. Your donations keep this podcast going. Go to our website, btr.org, scroll to the bottom, click on Support the BTR Podcast. And until next week, stay safe out there.